Hey, Gotham, how are you?
I'm great. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for taking the time out to speak to us here on wonderful Long Island. Not too far from New Jersey, so I'm sure a lot of people are going to be interested in watching Thank You, Goodnight on Hulu when it premieres tomorrow, Friday. But, my first question is, a lot of people, they want their content right away. Is this going to be a 4-part series that you can watch right away, or are we going to have to wait every week until for the 4 weeks?
Right away, from what I understand, Hulu's in the business of binge watching. So I think it's like midnight tonight. It all goes live, and people can watch all 4 if they have the stamina.
Because, that's what everybody says. Now I have to wait. I think everybody's gotten so used to instant gratification. So if you are a huge Bon Jovi fan, you'll be able to watch this amazing series. Nothing but rave reviews. And you've been doing documentaries for a while. I mean, you started basically with sports documentaries. And were you a fan of Bon Jovi growing up? I mean, you are in the right age to be a child of the 80s. Were you a fan of his music? And how did you get involved with this? I'm sure you've heard this question a lot, but I'm going to ask you again.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I was like an obsessive fan. I was a fan. The band really exploded onto the scene in 1986 with Slippery When Wet, and that's the album where You Give Love a Bad Name, and of course, like the most famous song, Living on a Prayer. So I was a teenager, or I was 10 years old, I guess, around that time. I've sung that song many times, like everyone else, in karaoke, or heard it during a timeout at a big game or something like that. But I wouldn't say I was an obsessive fan. I got approached by John on this one. Like you said, I work mostly on sports stuff. John's a huge sports fan. He had seen something I had done with Tom Brady a couple of years ago called Man in the Arena, which really looked at Tom's 20 years of success on the football field. And at the time, the band was sort of approaching its 40th anniversary, and John was like, I kind of want to look back and celebrate the 40 years. Would you be interested? And, it didn't take me long to say, yes, I'm up for it.
And from what I read, he actually gave you sort of a carte blanche to do whatever you felt the process was to get this documentary to tell the best story. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, so look, there's a 40-year, it's 40 years. So, like, I just needed space and time to, like, sort of figure it out and collect all this archive and build my own team to really dig into that. What was also going on, and this kind of has the analogy to sports works here, is like John had an injury. Something was going on with his voice. As we were starting to work on this, I noticed that, and I asked him, like, what's going on? And he said, he had been struggling for the last few years, like losing his voice, and he wasn't even sure if he'd ever be able to perform again. And initially, he didn't really envision that as part of the doc, and I was like, no, that's definitely part of the doc. That feels really interesting to me. I'd like to follow that. So he was willing and, open to, I don't know how much he enjoyed it, but
because, there was a lot of,
really important.
There was a lot of negative videos out there, I guess, when he was singing, and people were really, they were really dogging him, saying that, why would you pay to go see, a Bon Jovi concert? Listen to this. And, everybody films everything now. So I don't know if that was discussed in the documentary as well.
Yeah. That was in April of 22. And that was basically John going out to see if he still had it, if he could still, like, perform at the level he wanted. And, what's sort of interesting about all of that is, like, I was there, we were filming, and you see that in the doc. And, I would kind of spend those shows roaming the crowds, and I would say 95% of people they didn't care. Yeah, was John, like, perfect? Is he hitting the high note, like he did back in the 80s? Probably, no, definitely not. But, people came to those shows because they wanted to reclaim some part of their past and live in it, and people were having a ball. Yeah, there was 5% of people, critics, haters, pulling out their cell phones and stuff like that and posting it. He saw it, I think it hurt. But it also kind of, like, at the end of that tour, and this is again in the doc, he was basically like, that's it, I'm done. Like, thank you, good night. That's where the title comes from. He ended up, he had a doctor who's like, okay, if you got nothing to lose at this point, like, you're done, let's try this surgery. And so he ends up having surgery now, again, going back two summers ago. And ever since then, he's been, very diligently, obsessively trying to get back and all signs are good. I mean, I wouldn't say he hasn't announced a tour just yet, but he can sing. I've heard him. He did a benefit concert not too long ago, a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
He can sing. The issue is, can he do it 2.5 hours a night, 4 nights a week, which I think is like where he has to be in his own mind.
Sure.
To go back out on the road.
I mean, and he just came out with a new album too. So Bon Jovi fans, it wouldn't be out of the realm of impossibility if he does announce a tour. And thank you, Goodnight. The Bon Jovi Story will be premiering on Hulu on midnight tonight on April 26th. It's a four-part documentary, and it was directed by the gentleman I'm speaking with right now, Gotham Chopra, who is a huge sports fan as well. I know you're from the Boston area, and you follow the Red Sox, but see, I'm a Mets fan. I actually do some of the announcing for the Mets at Citi Field as well. And what's your take on the Mets this year? How far are we going to go as a New York franchise in baseball?
I am a huge baseball fan. Of course, I remember 1986 as if it was yesterday. So I don't have great fondness for the Mets, but it was a long time ago. I do sort of empathize with
I was going to say
fan bases.
The Red Sox have done quite. The Red Sox have done. You've gotten your comeuppance. I would say.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, we've certainly. It's actually my whole childhood was defined by failure and curses and tragedies and stuff like that. The Mets, 86, 2003 against the Yankees, all that sort of stuff. So it's kind of unfamiliar territory to be in this place where, the Red Sox, I mean, not particularly great right now. But yeah, I don't know. The Mets, I know they're around 500 or maybe a few games over 500.
Yeah.
Still so early, so hard to see. But, it's like I live in L.A. now, and I see, all the sort of noise around the Dodgers, and they're okay. They probably have around the same record as the Mets right now.
Yeah, I think so.
That's why they play the games, I guess.
It's Rob Rush on with Gotham Chopra, and if there's one thing that will fans find, I'm sure more than one thing, but will they find some real shocking things out about the band over their 40-year career that maybe nobody knew before? We certainly get into what happened in 2013 with Richie's departure from the band, Richie Sambora's departure from the band. We get into all the crazy stuff in the 80s with Slippery When Wet, and when the real rock star stuff kicks in, the sex, drugs, rock and roll. So I think that's all there. It's interesting that you just sort of brought up the sports because which historically has sort of been my background. But what I would say that I sort of discovered is, just how hard these guys worked. It is like sports where you get to a certain level and everyone is talented. What defines success is the work ethic, the grind, and the chemistry, And that's what you see in John. That's what you see in the band. It, to me, is the reason that this band is actually, they just had their 18th album. They're now into their 5th decade. That's the secret sauce. And, it's what makes great championship teams. And it's the thing that really comes across, I would say, if you make it through the full 4 episodes. Now, you want the realism, of course, in your documentaries. And did it help that, John let you do that? Because there are, I'm sure, instances maybe that you've worked with or in the past where people want to do a documentary and they want to sugarcoat things. And did that help that he said, hey, we're going to show warts and all?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the last thing I wanted to do, I think he, once we got into it and understood the process, is you don't want to do vanity pieces, puff pieces. I mean, that especially with a fan base as big as his, they pick up on that super fast. And so, not only is it just not a great film, it just fails at whatever your ambitions are. So yeah, I think that, he just understood early on, okay, well, it wasn't just about creative control and just all of that. It was about, give me time, give me some time to sort of figure this out. This is a lot of puzzle pieces when you're trying to construct 40 years and there's, so many different band members, so many supporting cast, all of that. We got to go out because, by the way, they all have different memories across the 40 years of like what transpired, how it went down. Like it's also filtered through the lens of emotions now. So you kind of have to navigate all that.
Well, thank you. Good night. The Bon Jovi Story premieres on the 26th on Hulu and Gotham Chopra. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.